Adama was known far and wide for her beauty, her flawless skin, the way her eyes seemed to shine like stars in the night, and her smile that made heads turn wherever she went. She had built an empire in the bustling city of Lagos. Her successful beauty makeup line was the most sought after in the city. Women across the country would travel miles just to sit at her feet and learn her secrets, hoping to capture even a fraction of her beauty. Her mansion stood tall in the heart of the city with lush gardens, sparkling fountains, and high gates that kept the world at a respectful distance. Adama lived in luxury inside. Her place was decorated with expensive art, soft velvet couches and marble floors that gleamed in the sunlight. She had everything she could ever want, and it all seemed perfect. Though Adama lived in the city now, she had not always been surrounded by wealth and admiration. She had grown up in a small village called Umu, where life was simple and people knew their roots. It was there that Adama first learned about true beauty. Her grandmother Mama K had been a healer, a woman who knew the power of the earth. Mama K had passed down the knowledge of herbs and ancient secrets, whispering them to Adama as a child. Beauty is not just what you see, Mama K would say. It is power over others, but you must be willing to pay the price. Adama remembered those words well. As she grew older, she became consumed with fear of losing her beauty. She could not bear the thought of wrinkles marking her smooth skin or her hair thinning like that of the older women in the village. She watched how the other women aged, how their once vibrant laughter became tired sneeze, and their proud features faded into the shadows of their past. She swore that this fate would never be hers. So while the other young women of Umu danced in the moonlight or spent time at the river, Adama stayed inside practicing the forbidden rituals her grandmother had once hinted at. When she moved to the city, Adama quickly realized that beauty was a currency in the crowded streets, and glittering. Beauty was power, and power could get you anything you wanted. But she knew that one day her beauty will fade, she will grow and no longer use her beauty to her advantage. She started makeup line using her grandmother's secret herbs as the foundation for her products. Word spread fast. The makeup didn't just enhance a woman's looks, it transformed them. Skin glowed, wrinkles disappeared, and eyes sparkled with a new light. Adama fame grew with each passing day. Her face appeared on billboards, in magazines, and on the screens of every TV in the city. People adored her, especially men. They cherished her beauty, hanging on to her every word. Some would send her expensive gifts, while others would do anything just to be close to her. Her influence was unmatched. Many powerful men wanted Adama's attention, hoping to be with her because they believed she could bring them luck, success, or even a bit of her magic. With her beauty came great power, and Adama knew how to use that power to her own advantage. Other young women looked up to her. They wanted to be her. They would gather outside her makeup studio hoping for a glimpse of her radiant face or a kind word. People signed up for her makeup lessons, willing to pay large sums of money just to learn the secrets behind her flawless skin and the makeup that made her so alluring. Adama's wealth grew even more, as did her reputation. Her life seemed perfect on the outside, a fairy tale of success and beauty. Every evening Adama would lock herself in one of her grand rooms. The walls, painted a deep red, were covered in mirrors, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and oils. It was here, under the soft glow of golden lamps, that Adama performed her nightly rituals inside her private chambers, far away from the eyes of her admirers. She mixed ingredients that were never meant to be touched by human hands. One by one women came to learn from Adama, and beautiful ones went missing. Some, their memories were clouded, their spirits weakened, but no one could explain why. They just knew that after visiting Adama they felt different, like a part of them had been taken away. But there was one woman who felt something even stronger when she stepped into Adama's studio. Her name was Yukamaka. Yukamaka was a makeup artist who just moved to Victoria Gardens but was different from the other women. She had a strong faith in God and always prayed before making any big decisions. She believed that God would show her the way and protect her from harm. Yukamaka had heard about Adama like everyone else in the city. She had heard about her beauty and her success, but Yukamaka didn't just rush in. Before she did anything, she prayed to God. She said, "If this is where you want me to go, lead me, and if it's not, protect me." Yukamaka trusted God completely. When she finally decided to take lessons for a month at Adama's studio, Yukamaka walked in with hope in her heart. But as soon as she stepped through the door, she felt uneasy. The room was beautiful with big mirrors and shiny makeup tables, but something didn't feel right. Yukamaka couldn't explain it, but her spirit told her something was wrong. It was as if cold wind had brushed past her, making her heart race. She felt out of place. The women waiting in the studio looked quiet and blank, as if they weren't really there. Yukamaka watched them closely and prayed silently in her heart. "Lord, show me what this feeling is," she whispered. "Help me understand." When Adama finally appeared, she looked just as beautiful as always. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, and her smile was as sweet as honey. But Yukamaka noticed something strange in Adama's eyes, something that made her feel cold inside. Adama greeted her warmly. "You must be Yukamaka," she said with her soft, perfect voice. "I've heard about you. You want to grow your makeup business?" "Yes," Yukamaka smiled politely, but deep inside she felt the same cold feeling in her heart. She nodded, but the words didn't come easily. "Come, let me show you how it's done," Adama said, guiding Yukamaka to a chair. As she began to talk about her makeup techniques, something inside Yukamaka was stirring. Her mind felt light, her thoughts cloudy, and she didn't like the feeling at all. She began to pray again, asking for strength. As Adama continued to speak, Yukamaka felt something dark in the air. It was as if there was an invisible force in the room, something that wanted to pull her in, but Yukamaka's faith was strong. She could feel God's protection around her even in that cold place. Adama suddenly stopped speaking and looked at Yukamaka closely. Her smile faded for a moment and her eyes seemed to search Yukamaka. "So you are different?" Adam said softly, almost in a whisper. Yukamaka's heart skipped a bit. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already knew that Adama could sense her strength. Adama smiled again, but this time, it wasn't the warm smile from before, it was something else. "I've seen many women come and go, but you are not like the others." Yukamaka felt a chill run down her spine. She prayed even harder, her heart steady with faith. Adama explained most of her products and displayed a plan on how the lessons will go from the following day. Yukamaka said nothing more. She stood up, thanked Adama politely, and walked out of the studio. Her heart was pounding, but her faith was stronger. She knew something was deeply wrong with Adama, but she didn't fully understand it yet. As she left the studio and stepped into the bright city streets, Yukamaka felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She knew she had just been in the presence of something evil, but God had protected her. Yukamaka kept attending her lessons at Adama's studio, but something had changed. Adama no longer seemed happy to have Yukamaka around. In fact, she looked uncomfortable whenever Yukamaka walked through the door. Most of the time, Adama sent one of her assistants to help Yukamaka, avoiding her as much as possible. At first, Yukamaka tried to be patient, but after a few days she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She had paid a lot of money to be taught by Adama herself, not by some assistant. One afternoon, when Adama once again tried to send her assistant, Yukamaka calmly but firmly spoke up. "I didn't come here to be taught by someone else," she said. "I came to learn from you." Adama's eyes flashed with irritation, but she kept her sweet smile. "Of course," she said, dragging her feet as she walked over to Yukamaka. It was clear that she didn't want to be near her, but she couldn't refuse outrightly. Finally, Adama stood next to Yukamaka by the mirror. Yukamaka watched as she adjusted her hair and then glanced at Yukamaka without much interest. "We have no models today," Adama said, her voice soft but cold. "So there's nothing we can practice on. You have to come back tomorrow." Yukamaka sat on the chair watching as Adama pretended to be busy signing papers and smiling at other clients, clearly happy to have gotten rid of her for the day. Just as Yukamaka sat glued to her phone, the door swung open and in walked Oni, Yukamaka's friend. She had a bright smile on her face as she waved at Yukamaka. As she stepped inside the studio, "I called my friend Oni," Yukamaka said, her voice calm but firm. "We can practice on her." Adama's smile faltered for a split second and disappointment flashed across her face. She hadn't expected Yukamaka to find a solution so quickly. She had wanted to push her out for the day, but now, with Oni standing in front of her, she had no choice but to continue the lesson. "Fine," Adama said, her voice tight as she forced a smile. "Let's begin." Oni sat down in the chair, excited to be part of the lesson. Adama started gathering her makeup tools, but before she could apply anything to Oni's face, Yukamaka quietly reached for each item. She closed her eyes and prayed over every brush, every powder, Every cream Adama's eyes narrowed as she watched Yukamaka silently pray, but she didn't say a word. She simply waited, her smile becoming more strained with each passing moment. There was a tension in the air that no one else seemed to notice, but Yukamaka could feel it. Finally, the makeup was done. When Oni looked in the mirror, she gasped in amazement. Her face looked flawless, almost like someone else. The makeup had transformed her. She smiled brightly and touched her cheeks. "I love it," she exclaimed. "I won't take this off until it peels by itself." Yukamaka smiled, happy that her friend liked the results. As the lesson came to an end, Yukamaka and Oni gathered their things to leave. Adama, still wearing her tight smile, called out to Yukamaka as she walked toward the door. "Next time," Adama said, her voice sweet but with a strange urge, "you'll be applying everything you've learned. I expect you to show me what you can do." The following morning, Yukamaka's phone rang. It was her friend. As she spoke on the phone, her voice trembled with fear. "Yukamaka," Oni whispered. "Something strange happened last night." Yukamaka's heart skipped a bit. "What do you mean?" she asked, already fearing the worst. "I can't remember," Oni continued, her voice shaky. "It's like a fog is covering my mind. I remember walking into my bedroom, but after that it's all blurry. My head feels strange and I've had nightmares." "Nightmares?" Yukamaka asked, her voice firm but gentle. "Tell me about them." Oni hesitated, her breath heavy through the phone. "I see shadows, Yukamaka, dark figures chasing me through a thick forest, and there's this feeling like something is trying to pull me into the darkness." Yukamaka clenched her jaw. She had heard enough. "Listen to me. You need to pray. Whatever is happening to you, we need to ask God for help. I think there's something evil in Adama's makeup." Oni's voice was barely a whisper. "But how? How can makeup do this to me?" "I don't know yet," Yukamaka said, her voice low but firm, "but I'm going to find out." After speaking with Oni on the phone, Yukamaka prayed quietly, asking for guidance as she prepared to attend her makeup class with Adama. When Yukamaka arrived, the studio was buzzing with clients and her model was already seated, ready for her lesson. But today, something was different. Adama stood by her side, holding every makeup product herself. She made sure that Yukamaka didn't get to touch any of the items directly. Adama would hold each powder, each foundation, and each tube of makeup. Yukamaka would only collect with a brush when it was time to apply them. Yukamaka found this strange but tried not to let it bother her. She focused on her work, carefully applying the makeup to the model's face. But as she continued, the makeup didn't seem to blend properly. The colors looked wrong and nothing was sitting on the skin the way it should. She could feel the eyes of the other new students in the studio watching her, whispering quietly among themselves. When Yukamaka was finally done and stepped back to see her work, she froze. The makeup was horrible. Her model looked worse than when she had started. The foundation was patchy, the colors clashed, and the whole face looked like something out of a nightmare. Yukamaka's heart sank. She had done makeup for years before she moved to this part of the city. She had worked on brides' parties and special events, and people had always loved her work. It wasn't like her to make such a terrible mistake. She couldn't understand what had gone wrong. Adama stood next to her, still holding the makeup in her hands, her smile tight and controlled. "Don't worry, Yukamaka," she said softly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "There's always room to learn. I think you just forgot to use the concealer." Yukamaka stared at her confused. "But I did use the concealer," she said, her voice low. "I used everything you handed to me." The model, who had been sitting patiently, now rushed to the bathroom, clearly upset. Yukamaka could hear the sound of water running as the woman tried to scrub the makeup off her face. Yukamaka's mind raced. She had followed every step, used every product that Adama had given her, yet the results were worse than anything she had ever done before. She turned to Adama, her voice filled with frustration. "I don't understand what went wrong. I know I can do better than this. Let me try to make up on myself to prove it." Adama's smile tightened even further and she shook her head. "Oh, Yukamaka, I'm afraid your time is up for today. I have other students to attend to, and I can't stay any longer. But I do need assistance." Yukamaka protested. "I can sit by myself and practice on my own face. Just give me a few minutes. I'll clean up after I'm done." Yukamaka sighed. shaking her head again. It's not about that, Yukamaka. The studio is very busy today, and I need to make sure everything runs smoothly. You can come back tomorrow, and we'll continue. Then, Yukamaka felt a wave of frustration wash over her, but there was nothing more she could say. She could feel that Adama was pushing her away on purpose. Something wasn't right, but she didn't have the answers yet. She nodded slowly and packed up her things, her mind filled with questions as she walked out of the studio. As she left, she couldn't stop thinking about how wrong everything felt. How could her makeup have gone so horribly when she used everything exactly as Adama had instructed? Yukamaka had a nagging feeling that something much bigger was happening, but she didn't know what it was. All she knew was that she couldn't give up. She had to find out the truth. This continued every day, Adama standing by her side, making sure she never touches the actual makeup, only the brushes. Every product, every item, Adama held herself. When Yukamaka finished the makeup on her model, her heart sank. It was terrible, just as bad as the day before. The colors were wrong, the foundation was patchy, and the model's face looked like it had been painted by someone who never held a brush before. Adama smiled at her, that same tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't worry, Yukamaka," she said sweetly. "You'll get better. There's always room to learn." As she moved on to help other clients, Yukamaka decided to stay and watch the other students one by one. The other students also struggled. Their models looked terrible, just like Yukamaka's. No one could get it right. This went on for days. Each time Yukamaka came in, it was the same story. She would try her best, but the makeup would always turn out wrong no matter how carefully she followed Adama's instructions. Adama, on the other hand, would always create perfection. In Yukamaka's final week, something unexpected happened. As Yukamaka was practicing on a new model's face, two women burst into the studio. Their faces red with anger, they stormed up to Adama, throwing makeup product onto the table. "Look at this," one of the women shouted, pointing to her client whose face looked horribly smeared and uneven. "None of this works. Look at my client. Her face is ruined." Adama quickly put down the foundation she was holding for Yukamaka and rushed over to the angry women. Her smile never faltered as she calmly looked at the upset clients. "Please don't worry," she said smoothly. "Take this and wipe it off." She handed a makeup wipe to the woman, who quickly removed the disastrous makeup from her client's face. As Adama worked, the client's anger faded. With each stroke of Adama's brush, the client's face began to glow, transforming from something terrible into a vision of perfection. The once furious client gasped with each passing second. "Wow," she whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. Adama smiled with satisfaction as she finished. "This is how makeup is done," she said, stepping back to reveal the flawless face she had just created. The once angry client looked stunned. Her voice now soft. "I'm sorry, Adama. Maybe makeup just isn't for me. I can't seem to get it right." Adama nodded, still smiling. "Not everyone is meant for it. You will find something else you are good at." But before Adama could bask in her victory, Yukamaka walked up to her, her face covered in the makeup she had just applied on herself. "Adama," Yukamaka said, her voice firm. "Look at my face." Adama turned and froze. Yukamaka's makeup was even worse than it had been on the models. Her face looked like a clown with bright colors smeared everywhere. The foundation cracked and uneven, but Yukamaka didn't care. "Take that off right now," Adama shouted, her voice suddenly sharp and full of panic. Her usual calm and sweet tone was gone, and she looked at Yukamaka with wide angry eyes. "You can't walk around like that. Take it off." "No," Yukamaka said, shaking her head. "Yukamaka, take it off." Adama was almost yelling now, her voice shaking as she tried to stay composed. But something was sleeping. The calm, beautiful Adama everyone knew was starting to crack. She looked desperate, her eyes darting around the room. Yukamaka refused. Without another word, she turned and ran out of the studio. Her terrible makeup still on her face, Adama chased after her, her voice rising in a scream. "Come back here, Yukamaka." Everyone in the studio was shocked. They had never seen Adama lose control like this. She was always calm, always perfect. But now she was acting like a mad woman, all because Yukamaka had refused to remove her makeup. The students and clients exchanged confused glances as they watched the two women run through the complex. Adama's usual grace and elegance were gone, replaced with frantic energy. She looked wild, shouting for Yukimaka to stop, but Yukimaka kept running outside in the busy streets. People stared at Yukimaka as she ran past them with her smeared makeup and wild eyes. She looked strange, like a clown running through the city. But Yukimaka didn't care. She wasn't embarrassed by the stares or the whispers. Something inside her told her that this makeup, this terrible smeared face, held the key to the truth. Adama lost to Yukimaka in the crowd, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stopped in the middle of the streets, her perfect hair falling out of place. She looked around desperately, but Yukimaka was gone. Meanwhile, Yukimaka walked through the streets, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by. She felt strange, but she wasn't scared. She knew she had to get home. She needed to figure out what was going on, and she wasn't going to stop until she did. When Yukimaka finally reached her house, she was exhausted. She went straight to her room, still wearing the horrible makeup on her face. She didn't bother to take it off. Instead, she sat on her bed, her mind racing with questions. Suddenly she found herself standing in the middle of a thick, dark forest. The air was cold and the trees loomed tall and shadowy around her. The ground beneath her feet was soft, but as she looked down, she was walking on skeleton's bones which crunched under her shoes with each step she took, but she couldn't stop walking. The forest path ahead of her seemed strangely clear, like it was used every day, but it was eerie and silent, except for her own breath and the crackle of bones beneath her. She walked on, her legs feeling heavy like she was dragging her feet through thick mud. Suddenly a dark figure appeared in front of her. At first, the figure stood still, smiling as though it had just found new prey. The smile was twisted, unnatural, and filled with wicked joy, but as Yukimaka continued walking, the figure's expression changed. Its smile faded into a snare, and its eyes burned with anger. The figure let out a terrifying scream, its voice echoing through the dark forest. "Who are you?" it demanded, trying to move closer. Its long, sharp nails reaching out to touch Yukimaka, but something strange happened. The figure couldn't reach her. It scratched and clawed at the air, trying to rip off Yukimaka's skin, but every time it came close, it seemed to be stopped by an invisible force. "Who are you?" the figure screamed again, frustrated that he couldn't touch her. It wailed and thrashed in the air, but Yukimaka kept walking. Her heart racing with fear, she whispered a prayer under her breath, knowing that God was with her even in this dark place. The figure cries grew louder and angrier as Yukimaka walked away, leaving it wailing behind her. She continued on the path, though her feet felt like they were getting heavier with each step. It was as if something was trying to pull her back, making it harder for her to move, but she didn't stop. She kept going even as her legs dragged along the forest floor. As Yukimaka walked further into the forest, she noticed pieces of meat hanging from the branches of the trees. They were large and bloody, like they had been left there for some terrible purpose. The sight made Yukimaka's stomach turn, but she knew she had to keep going. The wails behind her grew louder, and it felt like a crowd of voices were screaming, echoing through the dark trees. Yukimaka closed her eyes and prayed over each branch she passed, whispering softly in Jesus' name. As she prayed, something incredible began to happen. The meat started to burn. Flames flickered at first, small and weak, but then they grew stronger, spreading across the branches. The fire roared to life, burning the trees and everything hanging from them. The forest around Yukimaka was now ablaze, the flames leaking at the darkness, lighting up the once shadowy woods. Yukimaka tried to run from the fire, but the same dark figure that had screamed at her was now caught in the flames, screaming and screeching. Its body twisted and burned as it reached out one last time, grabbing Yukimaka by the legs, pulling her back into the fire. She felt trapped, the heat rising around her, the figure nails digging into her skin as he dragged her closer to the flames. "Jesus! Jesus! Jesus!" Yukimaka screamed, kicking the figure into the fire. Her voice breaking with fear and desperation, she felt the fire closing in, the figure's grip tightening around her legs as it let out a terrifying screeching. Suddenly Yukimaka jolted awake, her heart racing, the sound of the scream still echoing in her ears. Yukimaka's body was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding against her chest. She sat up quickly, gasping for breath, her hand clutching her chest. "God, it was a dream," she whispered to herself, her voice shaky. She looked around the room, the familiar surroundings slowly calming her down, but the memory of the dark forest and the screaming figure stayed with her. That same night a scream pierced the quiet of Victoria Gardens. It was the kind of scream that stays with you, that crawls into your mind and refuses to leave, the kind of scream that makes you wonder what kind of nightmare could have caused such a sound. Everyone knew it had come from Adama's mansion, the grand house that sat like a shadow in the middle of the suburb, but no one was brave enough to talk about it openly. The fear was there, thick and unspoken, as if everyone knew that something terrible had happened, but didn't want to believe it. What Yukimaka didn't know was that the screams, the one that had echoed through the neighborhood, wasn't just a sound, it was connected to her dream. The figure she had seen in the fire, that ugly, terrifying figure, was real. It was burning, screaming as it was consumed by flames. The next day, Yukimaka made her way to Adama's studio again, but when she arrived, Adama was late. The students stood around waiting for her, their faces full of curiosity and impatience. When Adama finally appeared, everyone turned to look at her. She was dressed strangely today, her face covered with a hijab and large sunglasses that hid most of her features. Yukimaka's eyes narrowed as she watched Adama walking. Something about her seemed off. As Adama passed by, a strange foul smell filled the air. It was sharp and sore, like rotten meat or something worse. The students covered their noses, their faces twisted in disgust. "What is that smell?" one of the students asked, her voice muffled by her hand. "It smells like a dead animal." Everyone looked at each other, and then their eyes slowly turned to Adama, who ignored the whispers and continued into the room she opened, her makeup bag acting as though nothing was wrong. "Who's going first today?" she asked, her voice calm but distant. But no one moved. The smell was so strong, so terrible that no one wanted to be near her. Even Yukimaka felt a deep sense of unease. Something was very wrong, and now the other students could feel it too. One by one they started to gather their things, walking out of the studio, unable to stand the horrible stench any longer. Adama's eyes flashed with frustration, but she said nothing as her students left. Even Yukimaka decided to leave, but as Yukimaka walked away from the studio, Adama grabbed her arm. "I know what you did, and you will pay for that." Yukimaka didn't know what Adama was talking about. She simply pushed Adama's tight grip off her arm. Weeks passed and Adama's studio remained closed. The once lively place where women flocked to learn the art of beauty had become silent. The shutters were down, the doors locked, and no one had seen Adama for what felt like an eternity. People whispered about her disappearance, but no one dared to ask too many questions. There was something unsettling in the air, something no one wanted to talk about, but Yukimaka couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. She had to go to Adama's mansion. She had to find out what was going on. After asking around and making a few calls, Yukimaka finally managed to get Adama's address. The mansion wasn't far from her home, but it felt like it was away. As she approached the house, Yukimaka felt a strange sense of dread, as if the air around her was heavier. The grand gates were closed, the house quiet, but Yukimaka could feel something pulling her closer, something dark and powerful. Finally, Yukimaka pushed open the gates and walked up the long driveway. She could feel it. Something was wrong. The mansion loomed ahead of her, its windows dark like eyes watching her approach. When Yukimaka reached the door, she hesitated for a moment, but before she could knock, the door creaked open on its own as if it had been waiting for her. She stepped inside, her heart racing, her prayers steadying her mind. The inside of the mansion was quiet, but the smell of that awful smell was back. It was stronger now, filling the air with the scent of decay. Yukimaka covered her nose, trying not to gag, but she pressed forward. She followed the smell, walking deeper into the house, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Finally, Yukimaka reached the large room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open and the smell was strongest there. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her eyes widening in shock at what she saw. The room was dimly lit by candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. In the center of the room stood Adame, but she looked nothing like the woman Yukimaka had once known. Her face was pale and old, her eyes sunken, and her once perfect skin was cracked and peeling like old paint falling off a wall. She no longer wore her flawless makeup or her elegant clothes. Instead, she stood there in a tattered robe, her hand shaking as she held a small black mortar and pestle, crushing non-stop. As Yukimaka stepped closer, Adama's head snapped up, eyes wild with fear and rage. "You, Adam Mustard, you've been trying to ruin me, haven't you?" Yukimaka shook her head. "No, Adama, I've been trying to understand. What is this? What have you done?" Adama let out a bitter laugh, the sound twisted and painful. You wouldn't understand. My beauty, my power, it was never mine. I had to take it. I had to steal it from others. Yukamaka's eyes widened. Steal it from who? Adama's face contorted with anger. She looked down at the black mortal in her hands, her grip tightening around it. I took it. I took it from the women who disappeared. The figure in Yukamaka's dream wasn't just a part of her nightmare, it was a spirit. A creature that Adama had summoned through her mirror, through chants and rituals passed down by her grandmother, Mam K. Mam K had always known the power of beauty and the magic of the old ways, but while she had used herbs and roots to heal and protect, she had never crossed the line into the darkness. Adama, however, had gone further than her grandmother ever dared. She had learned how to take beauty from others' beauty. Women who didn't have strong faith, women who disappeared after visiting her studio. These women never left Victoria Gardens alive. Through the mirror in her private room, Adama would call upon the spirits, and the figure from the fire would bring her what she needed: the dried, lifeless skins of the women who had fallen victim to her makeup, the women who had disappeared wearing just forgotten souls. They had been sacrificed, their beauty stolen, their lives used to keep Adama's youth intact. Adama would take their skin, dry and shriveled, and crush it into fine powder. She would mix it with her makeup, blending it into the foundation, the brush, the powders that she used on her clients and herself. Some of the skin was burned to ashes, and these ashes became part of the powder she used. And only she can transform the looks. This was her secret. Beauty stolen from others' beauty that came with a prize. But now everything was falling apart. The figure in the fire had been destroyed, and with it Adama's power. She no longer had the spirits to protect her, no longer had the secret strength that kept her beauty alive. Yukamaka's heart raced as she realized what Adama was saying. You took their beauty? Adama nodded, tears streaming down her cracked cheeks. It was the only way I was taught by my grandmother, but I went too far. I used the spirits to take what wasn't mine. She held up the mortal. This is all that's left, but now they've come for me. The spirits want back what I took, and I can't stop them. Yukamaka's stomach turned as she looked at the mortal in Adama's hands, realizing that inside it was the crushed skin from the dried meat she saw in her dreams. The truth was far worse than she had imagined. The mansion creaked as if it was alive with the weight of Adama's guilt and the dark power she had summoned. Yukamaka could feel the spirit in the air. Restless, angry, demanding what had been stolen. Yukamaka stood before Adama, her heart heavy with sadness. She could see the fear and regret in Adama's eyes, but she also saw the stubbornness. Yukamaka's voice was calm but firm. Adama, I'm not here to judge you, she said softly. But you have to confess. You have to let go of this darkness. If you confess and ask for forgiveness, you can be saved. It's not too late. Adama's hands trembled, gripping the small water with crushed skin powder as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. Her face was pale and cracked, but the thought of losing everything, her reputation, her power, the life she had built, terrified her more than the spirits that haunted her. No, Adama whispered, shaking her head, her eyes wide with desperation. I can't. Don't you see my name? My business? The men who love me? The cars? The money? It's all I have left. If I confess, I would lose everything. Her voice grew louder, almost hysterical. No one will want me. No one will love me if they know what I've done. Yukamaka stepped closer, reaching out to her. Those things aren't real, Adama. They don't matter, but your soul does. You can still be free from this. Get out. She screamed, her voice shaking. Get out of my house. Yukamaka didn't argue. She knew that Adama had made her choice. As she turned to leave, she whispered a prayer under her breath, asking God to help Adama find peace even if she couldn't see it now. She walked out of the mansion, leaving Adama alone with her crumbling world. From that day on, Adama could feel the walls of her house closing in on her as if the mansion itself was driving her mad. She needed to escape. She needed a better place, something that fit her grand reputation. Her beauty empire was failing, and the one thing she thought she could rely on, her charm over men, was slipping through her fingers. Desperately, Adama picked up her phone and called some of the powerful men who had once been wrapped around her finger. She thought she could still control them, that they would help her like they always did, but this time, something was different. She refused to let anyone come to her house, afraid they would discover the terrible smell that clung to her. Instead, she tried to meet them outside in fancy restaurants or hotels. Adama would bathe herself in strong perfumes, hoping to cover up the stench, but no matter how much fragrance she used, the smell never went away. It was the same rotten odor from the dried skins she had once crushed and used in her makeup, a reminder of her dark secret. As she met with the men hoping to charm them once more, they wouldn't even look at her. The stench was unbearable. They would wrinkle their noses and found excuses to leave. No one wanted to be near her, even in the middle of a crowded restaurant. People would whisper and move away from her, their faces twisted in disgust. The stench followed her everywhere, a curse she couldn't escape. Adama returned to her mansion each night, the smell growing stronger, driving her deeper into madness. The grand house that once symbolized her power now felt like a prison. The famous beauty Adama was no longer known for her flawless skin or perfect makeup. She was now known everywhere for the terrible smell that surrounded her. News reporters, bloggers, and social media exploded with gossip. Rumors spread that it was her makeup that caused the smell, and everyone who owned her products quickly threw them away. Adama's beauty empire collapsed overnight. Weeks turned into months, and the longer she stayed in the mansion, the more her mind slipped away. She was losing herself to the very darkness she had created. One day, Adama could no longer take it. She left the mansion, roaming the streets with no destination in mind. She no longer hid behind her hijab or sunglasses. She wandered through the city with her face bare, her once beautiful skin now wrinkled and ruined, her hair wild, and the smell still following her. No one recognized her anymore. The once glamorous, powerful woman was now just a mad old woman wandering the streets. People passed her by holding their noses and shaking their heads. Some whispered what happened to her, where is her family, but no one knew the truth of the downfall of Adama. The famous beauty millionaire became a short-lived sensation. It was a paper fire topic. Everyone talked about it for a while, and then just as quickly, they moved on with their lives. Victoria Gardens went back to normal, but something had changed. The women who once adored makeup now avoided it, afraid of what it could do. They whispered about the curse of Adama, afraid that if they wore any makeup they too might end up smelling bad or grow old quickly like her. What they didn't know was that Adama hadn't aged quickly overnight. Instead, she had used the beauty and life of other women to stay young and flawless. Every wrinkle, every bit of youth she kept for herself had been stolen. Yukamaka couldn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe her if she told them the truth about Adama? The dark secrets she had uncovered, the haunting screams, the strange cursed beauty? None of it seemed real. If she told anyone what she had seen, they would think she was mad. How could she explain that Adama's beauty had come from something so evil, so twisted? No. Yukamaka had to keep the story to herself. She carried the weight of it in her heart, knowing that even if she spoke, no one would understand. The world would never believe that the glamorous Adama had fallen because of dark rituals, stolen beauty, and spirits seeking revenge. Yukamaka could only pray that the truth would never be needed again, and that the people of Victoria Gardens would remain safe from the darkness that had once hidden behind Adama's perfect face. Thanks for watching. If you stayed through to the end, please subscribe to my channel, and give this video a thumbs up so you never miss more interesting and true African tales from us. Bye.